Now that we have acquired the construction cost and the land cost, these two represent the two major costs for a development. There are also other minor costs which you could consider while doing the preliminary estimations. Those minor costs include the consultant fee, professional fees, administration fees, infrastructure fee, external work costs, contingency fee, legal fee, financial charge, marketing fee, land premium, and even the corporate tax. Now, how refined you would like to consider those expenses? It will be subjected to which degree of accuracy you would like the preliminary estimations to achieve. Even so, the estimations of those fees here, due to lacking of the technical details, some based on the technical design, some based on the operations, which at this stage of the preliminary estimations, all those informations are not available. Therefore, the estimations of those costs, it will be on basis of certain percentage out of the building costs or the development costs. Now the question here is, where do you get those percentage? It would be easier if you have historical data that you acquired from the previous project. Observe the expenses from the previous project, the quantum of expenses, let's say for the external work costs, for the infrastructure costs, the marketing fees, legal fees, and etc. You're going to expect your project going to have more or less similar quantums in terms of the cost, not too far deviated from your past experience. Now the question here is, what if you do not have historical data? How are you going to work out those numbers? This will rely on a lot of assumptions and probably certain guides for you to start with certain numbers. Since this is the first round you are doing these estimations, once you complete the entire project, this project will be the historical data for the following project. While doing the estimations for the next project, you will need to observe the actual quantum of that particular expenses out of the project. Then from the second project onwards, you can get a more realistic estimations. Over the time, the more historical data you have, you can observe the fluctuations in terms of the quantum of those expenses. Then you become more confident in estimating those expenses. Coming back to integrated design project, assuming now you do not have any historical data, these are some recommended quantum for you to do good estimations. You can always start with this quantum. Over the time, you can refine it further so that it becomes more accurate. Let's say now you want to deal with the consultant fees. You can use 6% out of the building cost plus the external work costs. This 6%, it will be inclusive of the consultant's fee for the architect, engineers, and quantity surveyors. This is also subjected to whether the market is competitive or not. If the market is more competitive, the consultant fee may be less, as what we normally heard from the industrial practitioners. As a good start, you can estimate the 6% out of the building cost plus the external work costs. Depending on the degree of refineness that you would like to go for your preliminary estimations, you can consider the external work costs, which if you have historical data, you can easily compute the cost per unit areas. But if you do not have any historical data, you can take the selling price of a unit divided by total building areas, and this method it will be inclusive all the land cost, building cost, as well as the external work cost. You may also incorporate the contingency fees. This amount is allocated for circumstances which is uncertain or cannot be predicted that require expenses. Probably you can go for 6% of the selling price. And then the infrastructure fees, which can be considered about 10% of the building cost. Legal fee, about 2% of the selling price, and etc. Let's say now you have computed the construction cost, land cost, consultant fee, as well as those minor expenses. Your next step, it will be for you to get the development cost. The development cost, it will be the summations of the construction cost, land cost, consultant fees, as well as the other expenses. Now that you have acquired the development cost, your next step, it will be for you to set your selling price. The selling price, it will be your revenue, which is the summations of the development cost plus the profit. Normally, this revenue here, we put it in the round number or any numbers that easily remember during the promotions. Bear in mind that you cannot simply set the selling price without taking into considerations about the market price. Remember previously in the economic feasibility study, you have done the selling price survey. Based on the survey result, you know more or less the market price. Then you can set your selling price with reference to those market price. Your selling price shouldn't be too high as compared to the market price, as this may lead to the risk of difficulty in getting your units sold. This might deter the interest of your potential buyers if the selling price is unrealistically high. Not being able to have all the units sold may bring to financial implications to your project that can even affect the profitability of your project, where you're going to bear the consequences in terms of the financial impacts to your company if your development project is not profitable. Setting your selling price much lower than the market value will lead to a slim profit for your project. This may encourage the sales, but you have to compromise the contents of the profit. This will be dependent on your marketing strategies. There is no standard answers, whether you should go for high profit margin or low profit margin. It goes back to the fundamentals. How confident are you with the sales? Or do you have any advantages that your potential buyers are willing to pay for the price, that they don't mind paying extra to acquire your units? Remember previously we did the SWOT analysis. You can look into your strengths and the weaknesses, whether you have certain strengths that your potential customers would like to acquire due to scarcities of certain good characteristics available in the market. For example, in the regions mainly with peat soil, good soil conditions is scarce. This could be a selling point, and normally the peoples at the regions would like to go for good soil conditions as compared to the peat soil areas. Strategic locations can also be a consideration, as this can minimize the travel distance of your potential buyer if acquired those buildings, support their daily activities. If you are very confident of certain good characteristics of your units, which seems to be very valuable to the potential customers, then probably you can go for a higher profit margin. Likewise, if you foresee that you have certain weaknesses that can deter the buying interest of the potential buyers, you might need to compromise in terms of the profit margin in order to ensure the sales of those properties. This is about the revenues as well as the profit margins. After that, you can compute the capital return. The capital returns is calculated by dividing the profit by the development cost. The profit is what you earn from the development. As the development cost, it will be the cost that you need to pay for those development. You are quantifying the ratio between the profit and the development cost to know the percentage of the capital return for each individual unit. You can even compute the return of investment by calculating the total profit divided by the total development cost for an individual project, summing the profit divided by the sum of the development cost. Then you acquire a number for the average capital return out of the entire project. Let's say the average capital return is about 40%. You will need to consider the durations of the project. How long will the project be? Let's say the durations of the project is 2 years. That means your 40% capital return should be divided by 2 years, as you are quantifying the annual capital return. With that, your annual capital return, it will be 20% per year. Now you might want to look into whether this 20% capital return, it is attractive to you or not, whether you should go for the investment. Now, if you have a very slim profit, your capital return may not be as high, probably less than 10% per year or less than 5% per year. Now, if you realize that you have very low capital return per annum, you might need to reconsider undertaking this project. You know that building development is a high-risk industry. It deals with huge amount of money, both to you as the developer, also to the potential buyers. If your development project is unsuccessful, this can lead to huge financial impact to the sustainability of your company. That's why you need to do these preliminary estimations to have an idea the risk and the reward out of this development project. Now, the calculations of the capital returns over 2 years of project is built on the assumptions that all the units are sold within 2 years before completing the project. It depends on the supply and demand of the market. This may not necessarily be true, especially in the oversupplied market. That's why in the economic feasibility studies, you should have an idea regarding the supply and demand conditions so that you can use those informations for you to work out a realistic financial feasibility estimations. Let's say now the market is slightly oversupplied. That you're going to foresee that you might not be able to sell all the units within the 2 years of the project period, as this is reflected by your marketing surveys. In terms of the occupational rate, that the occupational rate is relatively low. Now your percentage of the capital return, instead of dividing by 2 years of the project durations, you may need to extend for 1 extra years. This will reduce your percentage of the capital return. Let's say your average capital return for the entire project is 40%. Dividing by 2 years, it will be 20% per annum. However, if it is divided by 3 years, now your capital return it will reduce to be much lower than 20%. Now you will need to consider, under the poor market demand conditions, is it worth the investment? This is about the financial feasibility studies.